Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We had a closed session and we ran a little bit long. In fact, we'll be going back later to have more closed session. So I'd like to call to order the May 13th, 2013 City Council / successor agency to the redevelopment agency meeting. And if you'd please rise, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda tonight? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Rubens, report from closed session.
No reportable action, Mr. Mayor.
Council communications and announcements. Who'd like to go first? Ms. Clapper?
Yes, with the 2+2 committee, with the city council and school board members, met, I believe it was 2 Mondays ago. And one of the things that was discussed in that meeting was looking at the transportation, some future transportation system that we may have, buses, vans, however we might work collectively with what the general community needs and the schools. And I wanted to bring this forward to the council for a possible study session. Thinking this ties in with some of the other topics we've had dealing with traffic, and thinking about what is it that we want to have in the future, so that we can go back and share that with the 2+2 committee and look at how the needs of both groups might be met collectively with the resources that are available to us, if the council members would agree.
Okay.
And be interested
Mr. City
to that.
Manager can make notes on that, and maybe at our next study session, we can talk about, maybe we can get Samtrans involved in that discussion and see what they can help us with, perhaps.
Well, and part of it is looking at what are we interested in, and it may be that what Samtrans can bring to the table would fit, and it may be not.
Oh, exactly.
So just so we keep open on what the resources are. And just a couple of other things quickly. A couple of groups that I really want to kind of give a little shout out to, the San Carlos Green and the Sheriff's Department for the drug take-back event that was done a couple of weeks ago over in the library parking lot. And it was amazing how quickly those boxes filled up. In fact, I had to go out and get some extra banker's boxes for them to be able to put all of the prescription and over-the-counter drugs that were being recycled. And I was rather embarrassed to find out that there is over with the police department area in the city hall, apparently a box over there that every time I have gone to the women's room after a council meeting, I've ignored, or perhaps it's behind closed doors, so I'm going to ask someone to give me some assistance to locate where that is. But hopefully members in the community will be able to use that between now and the time they have the next drug take-back event. And the other thing was the National Rebuilding Day that was put on by Building Together Peninsula for our area. There was one home in the San Carlos area on Walnut Street that was one of their projects. And a woman, 93-year-old resident who's lived there since 1945, was they made some really significant improvements to her home to make it much safer, and I was really pleased to get an opportunity to see what they had done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the last council meeting, as everybody was going through their council communications, I don't think I had a single item, and I just didn't want anybody to think I was a deadbeat. So there were 5 things, actually, that I actually have something to report on this time. First of all, I want to agree with Council Member Clapper. She and I are part of the 2+2 committee, and I agree. Traffic issues are really a topic that is sort of coming up in different places. And also went to a Four Corners Working Group meeting just this afternoon before this meeting, in which traffic again was discussed, and that's another issue. And it also involves traffic into Belmont. And so Belmont has a similar problem, so we're hoping that we're going to get some synergy for working on that. Additionally, we had our volunteer recognition dinner on the 3rd for all the people that do all kinds of work for this city that's uncompensated, and it was a great evening and a lot of people there. Also went to the Housing Endowment Regional Trust annual luncheon on the 6th, and Hart is I'm on the Hart board, and that is an organization whose sole purpose it is to provide more affordable housing in San Mateo County. Great success. I believe Councilmember Grisilli and Councilmember Olbert were there, and I want to thank them for coming. And then last Friday, on continuing the housing theme, I also attended the Housing Leadership Council breakfast, and it was the largest attendance that they have had in I think about the 10 years that they've been in an organization. And everybody seems to be paying attention to housing now that redevelopment's gone away. There seemed to be a sense that redevelopment was taking care of everything, and now there's a discovery that now that it's gone, that everybody needs to start paying attention. So that was also an organization, or is an organization, that is paying a lot of attention to a lot of our regional housing needs. So I made up for the last time. Thank you.
Mr. Grocott?
A couple items here. One is I did attend for Ms. Clapper the library JPA meeting. They're going to be, we had sort of a study session, if you will, on the budget. And so at their next meeting, when Karen probably will attend that one, they'll be dealing with finalizing the budget numbers for the year. And I just wanted to note to folks that our library is going to be under reconstruction soon during the summer, and it might be an opportunity for folks to visit some of the other libraries that are in our JPA. There's some ones that have been built, newly built recently in the last, I would say about the last 5 years, and some that have been just remodeled. But of note are Millbrae's library. They have a very nice library up in Millbrae. Belmont, next door to us, has a library they built in the last few years. It's very nice. And where we had our library JPA meeting in Portola Valley, also a very nice library. So if you're missing ours, you might, and you got a little bit of time, you might want to go check out some of those others that are in the system. And then I wanted to give a personal note to an invitation that I know all our council members received from where I go to church. Central Peninsula Church in Foster City sent out a letter to all the council members about a luncheon that's coming up on May 30th. And at that luncheon, they're going to talk about the Global Leadership Summit 2013, which everyone is invited to. And they'll let you in on more of the details at that luncheon, which is again on Thursday, May 30th. And if you don't have that letter, or you'd like more information, I can certainly provide that for you. And by the way, the Global Leadership Summit, while it's being hosted at our church, and it does have some church folks involved, it also has people from corporations, and it's not meant to be just church oriented. It's meant to be community oriented. So it might be something that you would be interested in. And I also wanted to take note that after our last council meeting, when we discussed the landmark site, I think all of us got this same letter, but council received and staff received a letter from Black Mountain. So it was nice to see them reaching back out to us and working with us on those policy issues and so forth. One other quick item similar to that about somebody reaching out to us, I did get a call from the, is it Legacy Partners? Their political representative, if you will, asking to have lunch and meet and talk about the project. I have not answered that call, but I just wanted to, because of what Mr. Olbert did last time, announcing that he had gotten that invitation and he would like to see that more publicly broadcast, their changes and so forth. I'm going to decline having lunch or going over the project in that kind of private setting. I'm waiting for it to come to council. It'll go to Planning Commission, et cetera. But I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then last item, I think all of us were saddened by the news about Nadia Holaber, the Vice Mayor of Millbrae. I know I had just seen her at the Council of Cities dinner in Colma, and I had no idea that she was sick with cancer. So I would just ask Mr. Mayor if we might close the meeting in her honor tonight.
That was already yeah. Thank you, Mr. Grocott. Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't repeat some of the things that we've already referenced that I was attending with my fellow council members. Since our last meeting, just two items of a little bit lighter note. I had the opportunity to attend the biannual Kiwanis Show, which was a great deal of fun. I have to report I did not get to hear Mr. Rubin sing, but he did promise me that next time that will be something he'll consider. But it was a great show. And also, this past weekend, I attended with my wife San Carlos Children's Theater community theater production of The Wizard of Oz, which, if you have the opportunity to go to it this coming weekend, I would strongly encourage you to do it. It was a rollicking good time, and if you pick the right day, you may even get to hear one of our fellow elected representatives sing, which is an unusual experience. I attended also Greg Rothhaus's, Chief Rothhaus's public safety meeting that he held, community meeting that he held, that was very well attended in council chambers. And I thank Greg and his colleagues for doing such a great job of answering community questions about public safety and dealing with things like door knock burglaries. And then the only other comment I was going to make is at the volunteer dinner that Ron had mentioned a number of us were at, I had the opportunity to sit at the table of the Youth Advisory Council, which was a lot of fun. Got to meet some younger folks who are interested in politics, including one young man who I sat next to who is both already, he's a junior in high school, he's already a private pilot and interested in political science. So I encouraged him to not forget about politics as a possible career. So that's it.
Okay. Just a couple of things. This past weekend, the Kiwanis was the major sponsor in a Child Safety Day, along with the Police Bureau and the Fire Department and the school district's wellness program, where they provided bicycle safety courses and free helmets, child seat inspections, and so on. And I understand it was quite well attended. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Kiwanis for sponsoring that and providing some community service in that area. And the other item I have is on May 23rd, Thursday, May 23rd, between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m., the San Carlos Youth Center will be having an open house for parents and families to come see what the Youth Center is all about if you haven't seen out what it's about, and tour the facilities, learn about the programs. And Youth Center participants must be in 5th grade or 10 years of age, but families of all ages with kids of all ages are welcome for the evening. So again, that's May 23rd, 6 to 8 p.m. at the San Carlos Youth Center. It's an open house. Okay, so moving on.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I could add just
Sure.
one announcement of my own, just to remind the community that this coming weekend is, in fact,
Right.
Hometown
Is-
Days.
Hometown Days. Thank you, Mr.
Give a shout out
Manager.
for our big community event.
We have a parade on we have some events on Friday evening, I think, too, and then we have a parade on Saturday morning, and then we have pancake breakfast, and then we have
Fun run and-
dinner on Sunday night, and all kinds of games and activities and things in the community this weekend at Burton Park. How could we all forget that? I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Linda's never going to let you forget.
That's right. Well, you guys didn't say it either, so. All right, number 5, presentations. We have a couple of presentations tonight. The first presentation we have is a proclamation commending the Carlmont Interact Club. So we have representatives, I think, from that club here, and I'll be coming down. Do we have a microphone for me? Oh, we do. Thank you. All right, put my jacket on to be formal. You just meet me at the podium there, ladies. We'll go from there. So I get organized. Now I guess I can carry them all down. Okay. Oh, excuse me, gentlemen too. I apologize. So let me read this because otherwise I'll put my glasses on. These folks are members of the Carlmont Interact Club, which is a community service organization that has served the communities of San Carlos and Belmont for over 2 decades. And I'm going to read these whereases. A lot of times I don't read them, but I think it's very appropriate tonight. Whereas the Carlmont Interact Club has endeavored to engage youth in volunteerism and leadership and currently has over 50 members. And whereas during the past year, the Carlmont Interact Club participated in numerous San Carlos events, including the Goblin Walk, the Night of Holiday Lights, and Hometown Days, and sponsored a volunteer cleanup at the San Carlos Youth Center. And also volunteered with other organizations, including the Second Harvest Food Bank and Jog for Jill. And it has also raised funds to combat human trafficking and child slavery, trafficking and child slavery by sponsoring a movie night and bake sale. And whereas volunteering one's time and resources has traditionally been and continues to be an element elemental part of the essence and traditions of our community and is essential to its spirit and vitality. So it's my pleasure to present to the membership of the Interact Club 2 commendations. I think we're going to split them up somewhere. And thank you very much. And I would hopefully like to have you all introduce yourself and tell me where you go to Carmont. I know that because it says so. But what year you are and a couple of comments maybe. So.
Okay, I'm Scott. I'm a junior at Carmont, and I am next year's president. We're working on some things over the summer to get 8th graders involved in our club, and we're looking forward to another good year next year.
My name's Michael. I'm a junior at Carmont, and I've just recently became on the board of the Interact Club, and we're looking forward to the pancake breakfast and the fun run this weekend.
Great. Ladies?
Hi, my name's Quinn. I'm a graduating senior this year, and we're looking forward to Hometown Days and are really happy about our great year that we had this year.
Hi, my name is Sina. I'm also a graduating senior as well as co-president with Quinn. We're truly grateful to live in this amazing community and really happy we got this opportunity, so thank you.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, sure, we can get one. I got to talk a little longer, you know. We'll get one. I won't run. I just can't tell you how much it means to the community and to the council, certainly, representing the community, that folks at your ages are volunteering, because that's the future. Without starting now, it doesn't happen. And to everybody watching out there, everybody who's here, I mean, it's a terrific situation. I'm so happy that we were able to do this for you. I'll give one to this side and one to the other, and we'll go from there. But again, this is the future, and folks, this is how we all start. So why don't we let this young lady take a picture of us, and we'll go from there. Go on over here. All right. Can you get us all in? I can. Okay. Put this up, like an idiot. Looks like you guys have big shoes to fill here, so good luck with that. The second presentation we have is declaring that May 19th through May 25th, 2013 is National Public Works Week, and there's a number of whereases in this one. Basically, Public Works is one of those situations that, thank you folks, Public Works is one of those situations where we don't pay attention to until it doesn't work. And streets, our sewers, our all the infrastructure that we have in the city. And we're fortunate to have a terrific Public Works Director, Jay Walter. And Jay, I guess, why don't you come on up and we'll give you this proclamation and maybe let you say a couple of words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It means a great deal to the Public Works Department that the council would recognize them in this way, because as you mentioned, when things go clunk in the night, it's usually the Public Works employees who are responding in storms and other kinds of bad situations. And for them to know the council backs them in this way, it's just a tremendous, tremendous feeling, and we thank you for it. And I thank you on behalf of all of our Public Works folks for this.
Thank you, Jay, very much. Okay, moving on. Next item on our agenda is public comment. This is an area or time for folks who would like to comment on items not on the posted agenda. I have 2 speaker cards, and certainly anyone else can come and speak also. The first one I have is Bonnie McClure. If you'd like to keep our comments for about 2 to 3 minutes, please, that would be great.
Good evening, Bonnie McClure, speaking for the San Carlos Belmont group of the Sierra Club. As you all know, that on April 9th last month, the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to allocate 100% of the unrestricted county general funds received from the state to go toward affordable housing. We understand that part of the city's return funds will be used for Wheeler Plaza, but we would like to have you hopefully appeal to the County Board of Supervisors for them to match equal funds, and all of the rest of the money left after Wheeler Plaza be going toward affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. The next speaker card I have is Nancy Agronin. I'm sure I blew that, so please correct my last.
Did. That was fine. Agronin is correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and councilmen and women. My name is Nancy Agronin, and I'm a 12-year resident of San Carlos and a 17-year cancer survivor. I'm a volunteer with the American Cancer Society, and I just came to speak to you about the cancer prevention study number 3. So as the name would imply, there was a 1 and a 2. And the American Cancer Society Epidemiology Research Program is inviting men and women between the ages of 30 and 65 who have never personally been diagnosed with cancer to join this historic study. The ultimate goal is to enroll 300,000 people from various racial, ethnic backgrounds from across the United States. The purpose of the CPS3 is to better understand the lifestyle, behavioral, environmental, and genetic factors that cause or prevent cancer, and to ultimately eliminate cancer as a major health problem for the current and future generations. Participation is very easy, as the flyer will say, and it's available in our community. There are 5 different draw sites for the blood work that's involved. Just a small sample of blood to go to your doctor's office. It's just a small thing to do, but you initiate it by enrolling online and answering an online questionnaire, which takes a little bit of time, but you can do it in the comfort of your own home from your computer. It is truly a worthwhile project, and in California, we know that 1 out of 2 people will have cancer in their lifetime. So I want to thank you all for your consideration in helping San Carlos be a part of this important research study. And I also just wanted to share with you that the Contra Costa County was tasked with doing 300. They only went to 200, which is why I'm out speaking every day, every place, everywhere, trying to help to make San Mateo County make up for this. And truly, with our hometown days coming up, you'll be seeing me out there with my clipboard, encouraging people to join the study. Thank you so much.
Nancy, before you leave, would you give them the website?
Yes, the website is www.cps3bayarea.org, and it addresses the different the places you go, which one of them is Sobrato, right on Twin Dolphins.
Okay.
And it's also available on Saturdays and and evenings. And I will personally be the person in charge of those draw sites, given my background as a registered nurse.
Thank you,
and
Nancy.
there are qualified phlebotomists.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the input.
Wanian.
There you go. You got a double-double. All right. Thanks. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Okay, seeing none, move on to item 7, approval of consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and enacted by one motion. No separate discussion on these items unless members of the City Council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action.
Mr.
anyone
Mayor,
need-
if I may, we have one administrative change, a
Yes.
date change to item 7F, which is the strategic plan.
Okay?
On the last, oops, if I can get to it. On the last 3-year goal objective, which is plan for and implement financial sustainability, we have an item which reads, hold a city council study session regarding solid waste rates and potential discounts. That was scheduled for tonight, but as some of you know, our city manager was selected and honorably served recently on a
You mean
jury.
our assistant
Our
city
si- our-
manager.
so I'm sorry, our assistant city manager on a jury here in San Mateo County, which took some of his time, and we were unable to get this item ready
Okay.
for this evening, so it needs to move to June 24th.
All right. With that adjustment, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar unless there's items that people want to remove.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar items. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right, moving on. Move on to item 8, public hearing. 8A, consideration of resolution authorizing adjustments to the cost of services schedule, user fees, for fiscal year 2013-14. Ms. Mendenhall?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Every spring, in conjunction with the budget process, the staff reviews the cost of providing services and recommends adjustments to the user fees for council consideration. Conducting a comprehensive cost allocation and fee study is not an annual requirement, but given our process to begin the transition to a program-based budget, this is one of the strategic planning items, was to do a comprehensive cost allocation and fee study so that we can start tracking our costs toward our programs. This year we contracted with NBS to assist us with this process. The proposed fee schedule in front of you tonight, if adopted, would result in a net increase to the general fund revenues of approximately $600,000 in the next year. Nicole Kissam with NBS will discuss the process in more detail, and following her presentation, the departments and I are available for any questions you may have.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. My name is Nicole Kassam. I'm the Director of Financial Consulting for NBS. I'm here to review the results of the citywide cost allocation plan and the cost of service study for user and regulatory fees. Just want to spend a little bit of time with you tonight in a short presentation, presenting the key issues that frame a study like this, talk to you about principles and practices that are common in the industry, and leave some time at the end, discuss a summary of findings, and also leave some time at the end for questions you might have about the many pages of detail in the report that you've been reviewing. So the scope of services had two major parts. One was a citywide cost allocation plan, and the purposes of that study are to define citywide overhead costs and fairly and equitably allocate those costs to the departments and programs that receive services from overhead departments. The main purposes or uses of a cost allocation plan are generally to translate overhead costs into areas for recovery, such as sources of revenue outside the general fund, enterprise funds, special revenue funds, charges for service, such as user fees, and actually the original intent of a cost allocation plan was for reimbursement of overhead costs from state and federal grants. So those are common uses of a citywide cost allocation plan. The second major component of the study we completed is a user and regulatory fee study. We studied the full cost of providing services for each individual fee and also for departments and programs as a whole for the list of departments that you see up here. So we covered all types of administrative fees. Most of those are borne from the finance and city clerk departments for San Carlos. We looked at all aspects of community development, planning, building, and development engineering, police, and fire was actually analyzed internally by the city. So we did include a comparison of fire fees, but we did not analyze the costs behind those results. What we hope for tonight is that we can use the information in the report after some discussion to update the city's master fee schedule. And it's always good to clarify what a user or a regulatory fee is. It's not a tax or a fine or an impact fee. These are fees that are charged for specific requests for a service by an individual or entity, or they are also charged when city staff needs to regulate a certain activity under a municipal code or whatever may be providing that authority. So a little bit more about the process of developing a citywide cost allocation plan. We've included a schematic here for the major components of the approach, and those are an organizational analysis, a cost analysis, an allocation analysis, and then discussion of outcomes. So before getting too far into this, I would say that the methodology and approach for overhead cost allocation actually comes from a federal document called OMB A87. And that document talks about how to fairly and equitably allocate costs for reimbursement from state and federal grants. So that's sort of the genesis of overhead cost allocation. And then over the years, city and county governments, well, counties are required to do them every year, but city governments have adapted this analysis as a budgeting tool and a tool for defending other types of cost recovery of citywide overhead. So to complete one of these studies, the first thing we do is we identify which departments, or in the case of San Carlos, because of the program-based budget, which programs are overhead services programs, such as finance, HR, payroll, these are all examples, information technology, and which departments receive the benefit of those services. So that's the first thing we do is we identify indirect services providers and receivers of those services. From there, we functionalize the costs associated with providing overhead services. So there may be more than one type of service provided in finance or HR. And we develop cost pools for further allocation. And probably the most important component of the study is the consideration of which allocation statistic is most reasonable for distributing those overhead costs citywide to the departments, funds, and services that use those services from indirect services providing departments. So a common allocation basis would be the pro rata share of full-time equivalents per department, or the pro rata operating budget size per department. Those are two very common ones. It could be number of agenda items or an average of insurance claims. And that's how these costs are driven down to the largest and smallest beneficiaries from citywide overhead services. And then from there, the study, as you see in Appendix A, it identifies outcomes of those allocated costs. And we can pick those up and translate them into various recovery mechanisms for the city. So the final results of the full cost allocation plan have been prepared, and they were in Appendix A of the report and discussed. And those numbers that you see in Appendix A, they represent the maximum amount recoverable. And later on, they'll translate into a portion of the user fee study that we'll talk about. Can stop me at any time, but there will be.
Or you can just keep going.
Or I can just keep going, yeah. Okay, so for the user fee study, whoops, how do you go backwards? Anyway, for the user fee study, the most important issues framing a user fee study is that the methodology applied is defensible under the various legal parameters of the government code, state statutes, and so forth. So to do that, most of the guiding principles are going to limit a charge for service to the estimated and reasonable cost of providing a service. So the entire methodology and approach of a user fee study is structured around establishing that estimated reasonable total cost of providing services, and then taking policy direction from there as to whether to charge at the full cost amount or somewhere below. It involves analyzing current service levels, so how are the different fee services provided by various departments. It involves identifying the cost at both the individual fee level and an overall annual revenue impact perspective. And it also involves collection of various data points to validate these calculations of the estimated and reasonable cost of providing services. And now we're at the point of issuing recommendations to mayor and council and discussing those. So a little bit about best practices in the world of cost analysis for user and regulatory fees. Generally, the best management practice out there is to review fees every 3 to 5 years, depending on how much change has gone on in an organization. So San Carlos looked at their fees last comprehensively in 2005 and then again in 2009. So there's a very active approach to looking at user fees and cost recovery in San Carlos, which in our opinion is important, and it's good to keep the discussion fresh. User fees are guided by a number of principles. Actually, they're smattered throughout all sorts of sections of the state codes, but these three up here are probably the main guiding principles. If you look through the health and safety code and other areas of the various codes, you'll always see this limitation to the estimated and reasonable cost of providing a service. And if it exceeds If the fee exceeds the estimated and reasonable cost, then it's a tax. So the ones that consultants like myself follow the most are the three that you see up here. Proposition 218, user and regulatory fees are excluded, exempt from 218 proceedings, but a lot of the language in 218 talks about cost of providing services, and so we do use it as guidance. Proposition 26 is more recent and further defines the difference between a tax and a fee. We also use that because it is the most current, even though user and regulatory fees are an exception to Proposition 26. And then I also included Government Code 66014, which mostly applies to development permitting fees, and it just provides that very clear language there that a fee may not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the service for which the fee is charged. So those are sort of the guiding lights there when you're putting together a fee study like this one. So inside of the general approach to the fee study is obviously to work with city staff to establish the goals and objectives of the study. And for San Carlos, that was to update and to also recalibrate certain fees for service and to incorporate the program-based budget structure into the fee models for the city. From there, we work with the individual departments. We look at their fee lists to make sure that the way charges are structured is fair and equitable, that it optimizes cost recovery without being unfair to an end user. We ask for additions or deletions, and we also advise on additions or deletions based on our experience with many other agencies. We gather input from staff at many levels throughout this process. We talk to the individuals who actually provide the services, such as case planning or inspections, and we also work with the managers and so forth to talk through different assumptions that are needed. The fee models actually contain a number of cross-checks that validate the calculations. And that's very important because when you're trying to develop a scenario that shows estimated and reasonable cost, we better be sure that we're not projecting utilization of resources significantly beyond or below what we have to spend. So that's both labor time efforts and also costs. We've reviewed and revised these results multiple times at the department management and city management level, and we're here now to discuss and potentially take action. So a drill down here and just a couple more concepts that are included in the report. So Appendix B goes through the hourly rate calculations for each department that was included or looked at through the study. And essentially, establishing the total cost of providing services includes layers of cost. So the first would be direct costs. Those are labor costs and also services and supplies budgets that would tie directly to the fiscal year 13-14 budget. From there, we look at how those costs are applied between direct and indirect services. So there may be some internal overhead for a particular program from a department or a division manager. And then on top of that, we are also eligible to include citywide overhead costs or types of support and overhead that would translate down to the program level and then the fee level. When we divide that by the number of hours available, labor time is one of the main drivers of costs. We divide that by the available hours, and we have a composite rate per hour. So we're expressing the increment of time, 1 hour of time, the cost of 1 hour of time. When you look through those hourly rate outcomes, you're going to see a couple different ways of looking at that. For the most part, it's a composite rate per department. But in two departments, you'll see either a full-time versus part-time rate and or a sworn versus non-sworn rate. And that's just very typical for approach to those types of services. Once we know what the cost per hour is, then we can complete the next phase of the study called the cost of service analysis. And essentially that takes the fully burdened rate and it multiplies it by the estimated or known, if it's tracked, time to provide the service at the individual fee level. So that involves a discussion about process, current service levels, staffing, organization. And at the end of the day, the fully burdened rate multiplied by the estimate of time, or the known time to provide a service, will give you the maximum fee amount, the maximum cost of service per activity that you see in the column on the Appendix C, cost of service per activity. A couple more notes about fee schedule design. When we did look at fee schedules in each department, we made sure to discuss the various options and desires for methods of charging in each department. So in some, you'll see a lot of flat fees, where it's just a single fee for the service. In others, you'll notice that the fee is variable, where it starts with a base and then may scale by increments of project value or construction value. And in some, you'll see a deposit level where the intention is to track and bill against that deposit. So once we've established the cost of service per activity, which is the maximum fee amount, then there may be several reasons why a council or a department would recommend less than full cost recovery or less than the maximum amount. And we've just included those reasons up there in the gray arrow, the most common reasons that we see for subsidizing a particular service. So when we talk about cost versus price, anytime a fee is set below its maximum amount, then that subsidy amount needs to be funded through another revenue source, and often that falls back on the general fund. Another slide we just like to include. In general, this is the policy direction that we see for setting fees. There are certain types of services that provide more of a general community-wide benefit, and those tend to have either the most limitations on the fee amount that can be charged, they may be capped by the state, or they tend to end up with the biggest subsidy decisions by staff or by council. And then moving over to the right, then those fees for service that provide a private or individual type benefit will get closer and closer to 100% cost recovery. So the numbers we've all been waiting for. A summary here by department with a total at the bottom. These are the results of the user and regulatory fee study. So when we looked at estimated annual current fee revenue, so where the city's at today, we show about 2.3 million collected across all these different fee services that we've studied per year. When we look at the costs of providing those services, we come out to about 3.4 million. So we've got a gap of about 1.1 million. So if the council were to adopt all the fees at 100% of the cost of service per activity, then that would be the additional cost recovery that would be achieved. However, in the column there that says estimated annual revenue at recommended fees, department staff have taken a pass-through at various subsidy policies, and the total recoverable target, I guess you could say, would then be 2.9 million. So as Rebecca mentioned in her introduction, that would be a net increase per year of approximately $600,000. So this fee study, it just provides the information needed to realign fees and determine what the cost recovery policy is for various city services. A little bit more about changes or policies that came through from the different departments when they were considering their results. So for the clerk department, most copy charges, document certification, research, and notary fees stayed the same. And it's good to note that for the clerk, historically clerks provided for agenda subscription services and so forth, and the internet has pretty much made those free via website, so there's nothing to charge for because you can go look it up. Same with finance, copy charges, research and business registration certificate, reprinting, those are the types of fees that you'll see there in the list in Appendix C. And most fees there have been recommended at full cost recovery unless they're capped by the state, such as return check fees. The building department results, typical approach here to recommended fee levels is to subsidize smaller jobs for water heaters, for example, and minor permits, and fees for larger businesses and major new developments then are targeted at 100% cost recovery. With planning, service fees, as noted here, were recommended at about 100% recovery rate, except for appeals, historic assessments, and minor architectural review. That would be a typical approach seen in other agencies. And also we had some restructuring of fees related to environmental review. So if you have some questions about that, we can address those at the end. There were a couple new fees added, design review, listed up here, all recommended at 100% except for design review for Mills Act. And in public works, we're looking at fees that are related to mapping, public improvements, and plan checking, grading, and sidewalk dining permits. And full cost recovery is recommended for all fees there except for community banner, hanging and removal. For Parks and Recreation, basically what the citywide master fee schedule does is it structures a policy for the Parks and Recreation Department to come up with their program-based fees on a seasonal basis. So you'll see a formula in the master fee schedule on how to apply the rates and various costs towards developing program fees. And then the department recommends those mostly based on market, but there is a formula for establishing the cost of providing those services. What we looked at for the most part was facility rate rentals. And those, for the most part, the recommendations have been based on market rate. For police, a lot of those are limited by the state, and where possible, those have been recommended also at 100% cost recovery. So that's my spiel on user fees and cost allocation, and we're all here for questions.
Thank you for your report, Ms. Kism. Thank you for keeping it direct. And Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before we get into questions, actually, I did want to bring up one issue that involves me, which I have discussed with council and with the city manager. But I think, as many of you know, I am hopefully going to be building a new house in San Carlos fairly soon. So I am actually in the midst of paying some of the fees that we'll be discussing here tonight. Of course, any one of us could be paying any of these fees because we live here. And the advice I had gotten from both council and city manager was that that did not represent a conflict of interest. One additional thing I noticed, however, Mr. Rubens, is that when I went back and looked in some of the detail, I think some of the fees might actually be dropping in the city proposal. So I did not know that when I talked to you earlier. I don't know if that changes your advice, but just for the record, I'd like to have a little discussion here and make sure that we're all comfortable.
Well, I think this is the type of action that you're taking tonight that applies to all the citizens of San Carlos, and it's a totally voluntary action on your part. So I don't see a conflict of interest in participating in this decision or voting on this proposal. The other aspect of this that I think we talked about was the effective date of this, and I don't know how that goes into your how your project's going, but the effective date's not till August, so it's possible that it will not even have an effect at all on your project.
I wanted to say that I would probably be snatching myself bald if I'm not constructing by August and having paid all the fees, but one never knows when you're doing these things. But that certainly bears on it. I mean, I think in practice, I would be paying under the existing schedule. So, Mr. Maltby had suggested when I talked to him that one possible approach that if people felt it was appropriate would be to ask the council to vote on the fees in two groups, basically fees that had nothing to do with planning and building and then the planning and building fees. And I would simply recuse myself from voting on the latter, which I'm perfectly happy to do. But it does present an additional complexity for the council in terms of making the motion. So I just did want to tee this up so people were aware of the situation and see if there were any comments that people wanted to make.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
Can we
Grocott.
vote specifically on the fees that Mr. Olpert will pay?
I think so. I think we should. I think line by line. Do we have a building? Mr. Val, you're here, right? So we can go line by line on his account, right? He can't lower anything. We're just going to double it, right? Yeah. No, I appreciate your, personally, and I don't mean to interject myself, but personally, I appreciate your comments and having checked with our council and with the city manager. As Mr. Rubin said, I mean, we're all involved in this. All of us along the line sometime have done something with some of these fees, and I think if we start individually, we could all probably recuse ourselves somewhere along the line. So personally, I have no problem with you voting up or down on any of these, even if they specifically reflect yours, because we'll basically outvote you on that. But no, honestly, I think that, you know, I have no problem with you voting on everything personally. And as long as council doesn't, I don't know what the other folks care about, but I don't have any problem with it.
I have no problem.
I don't either. I'm just regretful that since the fees are going down, I just went through a big remodel, so I'm sure I paid all
There you go.
the higher fees. Oh, well.
Oh, well. Okay, so questions for this nice young lady who gave a very succinct presentation. Ms. Clapper, do you have any questions for her? Or for any other member of our staff, like Ms. Mendenhall or any other folks that are here?
Well, I was interested looking at the planning and building. And maybe Councilmember Olbert can actually answer my question, since apparently he's been studying these in great detail. Because there's so many different fees involved in planning and building, it wasn't clear to me, how does this affect an individual in our community? Because I wasn't sure cumulatively what the impact would be. Would the change overall go down, or would it go up? So I wanted to have an appreciation for that. You know, if it was a $50,000 remodel, $250,000, a new house, is there some way for me to have some perspective on what the impact would be on an individual in our community?
Mr. Valley, thank you.
Chris Valley, building official. I can offer some insight in that area. Let's say, for example, you were building a new garage detached in the hills of San Carlos that involved Solis Report. That garage would be in the ballpark of, say, a $68,000 valuation. Excuse me. The current fee for that permit would be about $3,400. With the new fee schedule, the fees for that, including the increase in plumbing and electrical and mechanical and so forth, would be more in the ballpark of $3,900 to $4,300. These are ballpark scenarios. I'm trying to avoid it down to the specific cents, if you don't mind. And then that same...
And that's what it would be under the new fees?
The higher dollar amount is what it would be under the new fees.
Okay.
And that's a $68,000 valuation.
Okay.
About
And did you calculate what that would have been under the old fees?
Under the old fee,
Okay.
the $68,000
okay, I'm sorry.
valuation was approximately $3,400. And that's including review of a soils report as well.
Okay.
Mr. Valley, though, I don't think there's a way, though, that you can actually say that any construction project is going to go up 10% or 15% or 20%, because every single one is going to be separate. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Right. So I just want to make sure that there's no rhyme or reason, because if I decide to build a house, then the percentages might be completely different than what he just gave you.
And if I may interject to follow on that, if I remember from looking at some of the schedules, it's because some of it's keyed to valuation. In some tiers of the valuation, it goes up, and in some tiers it goes down. So exactly. It
all depends.
It somewhat gets balanced.
Right. No rhyme or reason.
Yes, I do. Let's say you're building a $750,000 house in San Carlos. Your current plan check and building permit fees would be, for plan check and building only, are approximately $9,800. Under the new fee schedule, your plan check and building fees would be approximately $8,600 to $900.
So go down.
Yes, and that's in that scenario. I should note that with a 3,700 square foot residence, your plumbing, mechanical, and electric permit fees keep in mind that those fees were adjusted to full cost recovery and bumped up, for lack of a better phrase, to $140. Those fees for a 3,700 square foot residence currently, an electric permit fee for a house would be $252 under the current fee. Under the new fee, it only goes up to $260. So it's kind of gives you a real-world example of how the fee study gets applied to, the permits that we issue.
Other questions?
Okay. Yeah, that's fine for right now. Let me digest
Okay,
that.
sure. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know who would answer this, but I was looking at the items that said general plan surcharge fee, and there's a technology surcharge fee. What do those mean? I mean, what would be examples of fees that would be charged for those kinds of things?
The general plan surcharge fee, so is your question, what does it recover for?
Right.
Yes, okay, so the
It's
general.
a category.
General plan maintenance surcharge fee would be applied to building permits, and it would help recover a portion of the costs associated with maintaining and updating the city's general plan. So that's what it will be based on a percentage of project valuation, building permit valuation. And that's what it's for. Technology fee is basically the same approach. It's to recover the costs of replacing the permitting software and maintaining that permitting software.
Okay.
It's a very common surcharge in most jurisdictions.
Okay, and then
Ju-
there was,
Just to be clear, they're sinking funds is what they are. So we take that money, we set it aside, and then we make these large expenditures. In the case of the general fund, maybe every 20-plus years in a, general plan update that's going to cost $500,000, $1 million down the road. Same with the permit software, very expensive systems that are replaced maybe every 10, 15 years. So we take that money, those fees that we collect now, we didn't before, and we set that aside so in the future the council won't have to make those large expenditures. They will have created a sinking fund.
okay, all right, thank you. And then there was, under this fee schedule design, you talked about apply cost recovery objectives, and one of the items was behavior modification. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Whose behavior are we trying to modify?
Well, so for an example of that would be, let's see, good example. One example of setting a water heater permit fee lower than the cost would encourage the behavior of coming in to get a permit, which is a public safety issue. So that's one example, versus the other side of the coin, which the only one that's coming to my mind right now is an example of a false alarm response fee, which is actually more of a penalty depending on how your ordinance is written.
Okay.
But if you look at the cost of providing those services, you may want to charge right at the cost recovery level to deter people from incurring false alarm activity.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
sort of what I was thinking, but I just wanted some clarification. All right. And I don't know if this other question is for Mr. Valley or you, Nicole. It sounds like the planning fees are tied to, it's like a percentage of the cost of the project. Do I understand that correctly? Because they seem to go up if the square footage gets bigger. Is that correct?
Talking about planning or building, or both?
Well, I have planning, but maybe it is a building. It is a building fee.
Sounds like a building question.
Yeah.
Are you asking about the method of charging?
Right. Well, Mr. Valley was talking about, say you were building a $750,000 home or an addition, and it sounded to me like and he was talking about the fee, the old fee and the new fee. It almost sounded like the fee was a percentage of the cost of the construction. But maybe when you spoke further, it sounded like maybe it was part of it was related to the square footage, which I would tend to understand that more.
The answer is it's sort of both. So there's a couple different ways of building fee methodologies that are common in California. And the one that San Carlos uses is the most common. And it relies on construction cost multipliers applied to square footage of a project to develop a value of the project.
Okay.
So $68,000 would be X square footage multiplied by a value multiplier. And then from there, the fee table is a sliding scale. So for the first $2,000 of $68,000, it's one fee, and then there's an increment that gets scaled between different ranges of project value. That's how the fee structure works. Does that clarify?
Well, sort of.
You want to try?
What I'm wondering is that,
Okay.
is there more work involved in approving the plans for a larger project than a smaller project?
Yeah.
Is that why the fees are bigger then?
Yes, and the study takes great care to establish what the curve is in that level of effort as the value or the size of the project gets bigger. So we know that it's not exponential. So that's why there are tiers, so that the level of effort is structured like this more than an incremental approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have for now.
Mr. Grocott?
The question I have, I really just have one, and that is, it struck me when I was reading through this that the city council was included in the overhead costs, and then that made me think just, not just about city council, but about process. And I heard you talk about how you go through these different processes to come up with the fees. But we sort of stuck out as a sore thumb to me in terms of overhead costs, because I was trying to think, we have to be here anyways, right? We don't cost that much. I was a little surprised at the number, 118,000. I guess that's with the stipend we get paid plus benefits and so forth. I don't know why we cost 118,000 exactly, but there it is. So let's stick with people who've been talking about planning and building. We don't have anything to do with those projects unless they appeal a decision that's been made. So how does our overhead costs get figured into all these different fees, since we have to be here anyways because we're sort of general government?
So at the end of the day, the city council costs and how they're allocated to all the different departments and services would only be a very small fraction of the total citywide overhead component of the cost study for planning. But as a matter of principle on whether those costs should be included or not, they are eligible costs under all of the parameters of the government code. So they are eligible for recovery, and there are various stances on why to include them or why not to include them. I mean, yes, you may only be directly involved if there's an appeal, but you're also indirectly involved by working on local zoning ordinances and providing direction on various projects that need to be approved by the council. So there's many arguments that those costs are a valid inclusion in various fees for service as the policy decision makers for all city services.
So take that a bit further, though. How do you determine what percentage? Again, I come back to the argument that we're generally part of the government, and taxes pay for government in general. Fees only pay for things where you're asking for a particular service. So how do you decide, well, 90% of the council cost is for what they do generally as a government, and maybe 10% is for,
Right.
you can direct it towards a user fee.
So the way that those city council costs are spread inside of the analysis does not attempt to overly target one fund versus another or one department versus another. For San Carlos, it uses a share of agenda items.
Okay.
So a count of agenda items. And then it also uses relative program expenditures, so operating budget size. So the higher the count of agenda items for the last year, for example, the higher percentage of those costs that would be received.
So that's actually, all those kind of things are analyzed.
Yes, that's right.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Okay, Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a similar question to the thread that Mr. Grocott was pursuing, which I was going to get to a little later in the sequence, but since we're talking about that, I think we'll stick with that. I actually approached it from a little bit of a different perspective. Let me describe a thought experiment to you. And I think the issue here is that I'm not disputing that the analysis that you've done is consistent with government code and what we're allowed to do. I just think from an economic point of view, it arguably may be more aggressive than one could argue it should be. Let's imagine a city government that issued absolutely no permits, had no interaction in terms of user-type services at all. Maybe we just didn't allow anybody to build anything in town, okay? There would still be a city government. There would still be a city manager. There'd still be almost all of these departments. Some of them would be smaller than they are in our real world because we have people that we have to hire to respond to requests. And I would argue that it's only the spread, the increment between that sort of hypothetical and where we really are that is ever inherently allocable to user requests, because the rest of it, to use Mr. Grocot's phrase, is sort of general government. It would be here regardless. It would have to be here regardless. And I suspect we're not the first council that's raised this issue, so I'd just be interested, the reason I'm raising it is I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. Again, I'm not disputing that the analysis is completely consistent with what government code and various statutes allow, but they may not be actually economically sort of correct or accurate. So I'd just like your thoughts on that.
I think what you're touching on is a policy decision. It's really a matter of interpretation of the study and on the back end, how you want to price your services. So it's not the first time a council member has brought that up. You know, some people interpret these results by looking at the back end maximum and then looking at policy reasons for why not to charge 100%. And they do that on the back end, cost versus price. So a pricing exercise of charging those at or lower than. And you're actually on the front end, which is the cost to inputs. And you're saying, is that a reasonable input? So under the government code, it's a reasonable input, but under the philosophy of the San Carlos City Council, it may not be a reasonable input that the council wants to implement. But I would also say that there are many pricing strategies that are included in the master fee schedule already that are not charging 100%. So in the end, there are many costs that you're not recovering for. So if we looked at the total costs we're not recovering, then you could say right off the bat that the difference between 1.1 million and the 600,000 that we're actually targeting, well, there's your city council costs right there in aggregate.
Okay.
So there's so many ways to look at it, and it's a perfectly valid.
Well, again, I appreciate your thoughts, because as I said, I can't imagine we'd be the first council that have thought about this. Let me switch to a couple of less conceptual questions. It looked to me like when we were building up there's a point at which we were looking at tasks that some departments are doing, and we were assigning hours to complete a task. Does your methodology go back and take some real-world data about the number of tasks we did in this department over a year and test the assumed number of hours to make sure that we're not allocating 3 times as many people as we actually have?
Well said.
Okay. So you do check that?
Yes.
Okay. I asked that because I didn't do that years ago when I was doing something like that in a private company, and I got burned very badly for that, so I always remember that.
It's very important.
Yeah, it is. Another question, which actually may be for Ms. Boland, has to do with the Parks and Rec fees, which are, as you was explained, are a little bit different in the sense that some of them at least do not have to be tied specifically to cost recovery. They can be market-based.
Correct.
Do we know how our, let me call it margin, if you will, over costs compares to, for example, what the San Carlos School District is doing? Because they adopted when I was there, was part of the discussion, we adopted a somewhat more aggressive stance on some of those things of ancillary extra services that we were providing to the community. So have you ever looked at that kind of comparison?
We did not compare ourselves to the school district. We just compared ourselves to other cities and then other facilities as far as rentals are concerned within San Carlos.
Which is necessary and perfectly valid way of doing it. I would just leave staff with the thought that it might be useful to sort of cross-fertilize what they do, because you might get some sense of what the market demand is in town. See, I had a couple of others. Oh, do we have a sense of, there's a schedule in here which summarized the allocable costs by department, and that was the one I believe that Mr. Grocott was referring to with $118,000 for city council. Do we have a schedule that shows
It's on
what?
page 19.
Pardon me?
It's on page 19.
Thank you, because I couldn't find it again. And there it is.
So on page 6, actually.
Page 6. There it is. Great. The question I have is, for example, in each of these departments, or what you're calling overhead services provider, which is not exactly the same thing, the column is entitled allocable overhead expenditures. What percentage of each department's budget is that? For example, the $118,700, is that 100% of the city council budget?
In most cases, it's 100%. There's a
Okay.
couple departments where some costs were not allocated. For example, in the city clerk, costs associated with election support are not allocated.
Okay.
In finance, the business licensing function is not allocated. But for the most part, this study picks up 100%.
Okay. Let's see. I believe from my discussions that I had earlier with Mr. Malpe, just to confirm something, the budget, or the response that Ms. Mendenhall had given me, the budget assumed, the budget didn't, that we're currently operating under, did not assume the level of increase that we have contemplated before us here.
That is correct. As you're aware, in the current budget, the council authorized this study. So we knew there would be, based on significant changes in the organizational structure, that there would likely be significant changes in this study, but didn't presume to
take some of the money.
Create an estimate. So the same cost escalations that were put in sort of across the board for expenditures in that 2 to 3% range was used for the fee schedule.
Okay. My last question is, I'm not exactly sure who will want to reply to it, because it's sort of a general observation. When I went through the schedule, which tried to do as best we could a comparison of what our current and our proposed fees were versus some comparable local communities. And by the way, I very much appreciate the effort that went into that, because I know that those kind of comparisons are like
tough, yeah.
mind-boggling complex. Where there were comparisons, in almost all cases, we seem to be the most expensive city, where there was a readily available comparison. And I'd be interested in whether that's sort of traditional for San Carlos, or maybe did I just happen to look at some random pages that gave me that impression?
I think Public Works is probably an exception to that.
There were a
and
few, yeah.
Certain tiers of the building fee structure, and then some here and there. But in general, it looks like the recommended fees are on the higher side of the comparison. And I would just say that you have to caveat that comparison with the fact that, how do we know what the cost recovery policy is in any of those agencies? When was the last time they did a fee study?
When's the last time they did it? Yeah.
Whether or not the fee categories are truly apples to apples, we do our best to compare that, what's included in the service. So that's
fair. Just to respond, Mr. Mayor, to the comments you made, I would agree that let me call it the staleness of the study. I mean, if we're just doing ours, obviously it's in front of us, and if other cities have not done it for years, then of course we're going to look different. The cost recovery policy is actually, though, that's a choice that we make. That's not a matter of updating the data. That's a choice we make. And without beating a horse to death, because I wasn't on the council the last time that this was done, was that a similar situation back then? Were we on the high side then as well?
Let me jump in here and just provide a little bit of context. Going back for, gosh, and Brian, you can expand on this too, but I mean at least 15 years. cost recovery through fees has been a priority of the San Carlos City Council, regardless of how it's been comprised, where they've recognized certain reasons not to do full cost recovery in certain areas, such as some of the fees that apply towards smaller businesses have tended to be under full cost recovery. The health and safety type fees that we talked about earlier, it's been a policy of the council to have those under full cost recovery. Others, such as parks and recreation, that don't necessarily have to be set based on cost, could be set based on market. The council has encouraged us to set those fees as high as we think we can recover over the past years. Without having ever heard the council talk about this specifically, I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the financial revenues of the city, and the fact that we don't have certain revenue sources like utility user taxes or sales taxes or other things that a lot of when you look at the chart of surrounding San Mateo County communities, they have a lot of other different various types of revenue sources that we don't have, which has limited this council's, over the years, abilities to deal with how do you manage cost. And one area where the council has had control is over the fee structure.
If I may just, thank you, that's very helpful. Just to follow up on that, one item of that, is it your sense that, it sounds like our philosophy, the council's philosophy historically has been, in general, to lean more towards full cost recovery, except in certain specific areas. Is that fairly typical for neighboring cities, or is that, and maybe you have no insight into that, I'm just wondering if you do.
Yeah, to be honest, I really don't have an insight into that.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that, from a revenue generating perspective, for us, given the sources of revenue that we have, fees make up a larger percentage than a typical
Other
city
communities.
would. So it makes sense that for us, there's a special emphasis in looking at fees, whereas in other communities, there might not be the same emphasis.
That may also, I mean, I could see situations where it might not, but that may also answer my question in the sense that unless our costs, or if our costs are reasonably in line of providing services, then if they're netting less revenue, then they are adopting a lower cost recovery rate than we are.
That's correct. Yeah. And it sort of depends on, you can look at communities, let's say, without naming names, there's a community on the peninsula that has more than the average number type of hotels. And so they generate a significant amount of their revenue through transit occupancy taxes. Well, it's no surprise that that community would be more at the forefront in raising the per room tax rate for hotels. And a city like San Carlos that doesn't have a lot of hotel rooms hasn't chosen to be out in front of raising our TOT tax. We're kind of waiting, see how the majority shifts, and maybe once everybody or the majority of cities have raised their TOT rate, then we might come through and just say, well, we're just keeping up with the market. But we're not really going to be a leader because it's not really that big an issue for our budget relative to another community. Fees for us tend to be a bigger issue than in many other communities on the peninsula.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Most of my questions were answered before the meeting with staff, and some of the ones were answered this evening, so thank you very much. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this item? Okay, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. Discussion? Or motion?
I'll open
Mr.
it up.
Grocott.
Yeah, to me, the jump from where we are, I think at 68% up to 86%, we're just taking those numbers and transposing those, I think is a little aggressive I appreciate all the data that went into this and the study that went into this, but I think we're jumping up there pretty hot and heavy for the first move. And particularly in some areas like with the Community Development Department, Planning Division, we're at 43% right now, and I think the recommendation is to get up around 83%. And there There's another one in here I saw jumped quite a bit. The
General plan surcharge.
yeah, general plan surcharge, exactly. And with that one, in some regards, I wrestle with that because although it's not really a general government kind of deal, it's not like people who own property in San Carlos are saying, beating down our doors saying, when are you going to update your general plan, as though they get something out of it. It's something we have to do. It's mandated by the state, of course, and it's something that's good government to do it. But again, it's not something that people are banging on our doors asking us to give them that kind of service, really. So I can see recovering it some, but not perhaps as aggressively as this proposes.
Okay.
So I throw that out for discussion.
Okay.
Those are my ideas.
Other comments?
I'd rather see us come in at around overall, instead of jumping up to 86%, maybe in the 70, 75 range, somewhere around there.
Well, if I may, my thoughts are a couple. One is I think a lot of thought went into this, a lot of comparison with the other surrounding cities. But as came out in this discussion, what sticks out in my mind, it all comes back to our revenue that we get as a percentage of property tax return. The number that I always come back to is 11 cents. That's all we get. We're the fourth lowest property tax recovery rate in the county. I think that just drives just about every budget decision that we make. So while some of these fees I think are looking rather aggressive, I'd be interested in knowing what other options we have to adjust our fees and still be in the range of what other cities are charging. I just don't think we have the luxury that some other cities have until this 11 cents changes to some number larger. So that's all I have to say at the moment.
Ms. Clapper?
Yes, I have a great deal of appreciation for the amount of work that went into this, having done studies along this line for financial services clients to come up with staffing standards for how they could match what needed to be happening in their facilities with people who could do the work for the clients. And so I know there's a lot of detail goes into this and double checking the numbers. I tend to not react to the overall increase in the percentage of the cost that's being recovered, but tend to look at it along the lines of functionally what's happening by department, and looking at that's where members of our community, whether they live here or work here, are going to be impacted. And that's why it was especially important to me to hear about what the impact of building and planning is, because both of those are jumping up. Whereas Parks and Rec, we're not going for a 100% recovery there. It's on although this line says the revised recovery is 115%, when you look at the words that are in the study, which is a little bit confusing, we're not recovering the full amount for the program costs because of the market influence. So I think these all need to be addressed individually, and it's easy to think that the difference between 68% and 86% is, is that right? Is that wrong? Is it because we've underpriced in the past? Or is it because of the very dynamics of how this had to be redone versus how it was done in the past, because of how we're now staffed and how we run our operations? For me, one of the important things was understanding how staff was involved in reviewing this. And I think staff is our front line in dealing with the community. And I would certainly hope that when staff was reviewing this, there was a sense of how is this going to work with members of our community when they come in and they're charged these various fees. and that if something seemed that it was out of line, that they were getting feedback from them. And with, all I can do is trust that, yes, that evaluation has been given by staff. And if that's the case, then I would approve these changes. It would always be great to be able to go back to the community and say, oh, gee, we've been able to figure out a way to reduce more of the fees. And fortunately, there's a few of them that will be reduced. But as Councilmember Collins mentioned, we have limited income resources for how we're going to pay for these things. And we need to be going for the maximum recovery that will fit the market. So I would be inclined to approve these at this point in time, pending any other comments that council members have to make.
Okay. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bottom line, I'm fine after reflection with the staff proposal. I'm also willing to entertain changes to this. I presume they would probably be changes to lower the overall aggregate increase in revenues collected as well. So I'll listen to my colleagues there about that. There is one item, however, in the one component of the resolution that I do have a little bit of a concern about, and that's and I don't quite understand how it works. I suppose I should have asked that as a question. That's the inflation adjustment process. The reason I'm concerned about that is I actually don't think it's, in general, a good idea for us to inflation index our fees, because for one thing, probably the main reason is it puts a damper on creatively finding ways of holding costs down, because basically what it does is it to some extent makes costs a pass-through. Unless my understanding of how the inflation component of this works is wrong, I would actually, whatever we do, like to see that removed. And if we wish to make adjustments to the fees, then we make adjustments to fees, but
So the
not.
fourth whereas.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think it would be just as simple as deleting the fourth whereas, but that would be my preference, and that's actually the thing I feel stronger about than actually the specific dollar amount.
I tend to we look at like the general plan surcharge, and quite honestly, it is a sinking fund. It is a fund that we're going to need to. We know we're going to have to spend money on it. Granted, it's long range, but it's a pay-as-you-go type situation. So it doesn't bother me that much. The rest, basically, I think, as was mentioned by our city manager and also by our other council members, that we basically we're not trying to make any money here. We're just trying to recover our costs. So, basically we have a certain amount of overhead and we have to cover it some way or another. It's got to come from somewhere. And so this is a situation where we have an opportunity to, without overcharging, but basically recovering what we spend on the different city areas of building, planning, park and rec, public works, et cetera. So I tend to appreciate the study. We do this every 4 years, and we did it 4 years ago, and we looked at it again. A question to Mr. Olbert's area. Did we have in there a CPI type thing in the previous costs?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And I'd like to make it clear that the resolution doesn't say that in the future the fee schedule will be adjusted based on this index. What it's saying is that the staff will prepare a recommendation for the council based on the index, but every year it's still going to come to the council for adoption. So it's not an automatic increase. It's still going to be looked at and tweaked by the city council. It's just what you're saying is, for purposes of the staff putting it together, use this index as a guideline for issues related to inflation.
Okay. Other comments or entertain a motion?
Let me make one other comment.
Sure.
This discussion tonight actually has been very, very helpful for me. This presents an interesting issue if you step back from it a little bit, which is that because of some decision, and by the way, the reason San Carlos only collects 11 cents on the dollar of property taxes is because our ancestors of several generations ago chose to live in a relatively low property tax community. If you trace it all out, that's why those rates are low, and what communities that have higher collection rates, it's because historically they tax themselves more.
Well, if I could interject, Prop 13 froze that number.
I know,
We
that's
have no
why.
cho- We have
That's
no
why.
choice. Okay.
Right, no, I understand that, but
Okay.
that's why I said our ancestors, it's, and they didn't know what was going to happen in the future, just like we don't. So I understand the logic behind what we're doing, but it actually is kind of it's an unfortunate situation, because if you look at the fees that we're collecting, we're basically, in large part, the increases, we're collecting them on things that I would loosely describe as encouraging growth, okay, building and planning, okay? And, we've all said this, you've certainly heard me say it a lot of times, economic development is key to our success moving forward. And so it's just, like I said, I'll support the increases. It's just unfortunate that we have to be in a situation to do that, because it's sort of putting a little bit of a brake on our economic development activity. But I would be happy to, and based on Mr. Maltby's comments, sake of moving things forward, I will move resolution number 2013-45,
Number 45.
resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing amendments to the fee schedule for certain city services.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? Comments? Discussion? Mr. Grocott? No?
I'm going to vote no, because
Okay.
I think an 18% jump is a bit much.
Okay.
I would rather see us strike the middle ground, and we could always go for more the
All right.
following year. So.
Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, the staff, and Ms. Kism, thank you. Kism, I'm sure I butchered your name on that. Kazam? Alec? You're right. I'd correct myself. Me. Okay, the next item on our agenda is item 9A, which is consideration of adopting ordinance 1461 to amend the zoning district boundary map to RS-3, single-family low density for pre-zoning and annexation, and adopt a resolution of the City of San Carlos making a determination of a property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part 0.05, implementation of Article 12A of the California Constitution, commencing with Sections 95, Division 1 of the Revenue and Tax Code for the property located at 191 Lemoore Drive, APN 051-161-100. We need more commas or periods and something like that. I can't read that all at once. Yeah. Ms. Costa Sanders, what
Good
do you have
evening.
for us tonight?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Lisa Costa Sanders, Principal Planner. At your April 22nd meeting, the City Council voted to approve the annexation of 191 Lemoore Drive by the first reading of an ordinance to amend the zoning map to RS3, which is single-family low density, as well as amending the general plan to single-family low density for the site. Subsequent to these actions, the next step in the annexation process is for the council to adopt by resolution a property tax exchange between the County of San Mateo and the city. This resolution establishes the property tax revenues to be received by the city from the County of San Mateo, as well as the County Fire Protection District, once the property is legally transferred into the city. As included in your staff report, the economic consulting firm that prepared the fiscal impact analysis determined that the city would not incur any additional reoccurring service costs and would receive a relatively minor net fiscal benefit from this annexation. The San Mateo County Board of Supervisors will be required to consider a similar resolution subsequent to tonight's meeting, should you adopt it. And lastly, the action before you is, as I indicated, second reading of the ordinance to adopt it as previously approved at your April meeting, as well as the resolution for the tax exchange.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Okay, is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this item? It's not a public hearing, but might be someone. All right. If not, I'll entertain a motion. I guess a couple of motions. Separate motions, Mr. Rubens?
Yes, one's the adoption of the ordinance,
All right.
and the other is the.
Do I have a motion for the adoption of the ordinance?
I move that we adopt ordinance number 1461, the City of San Carlos City Council adopting a zoning district boundary map amendment for the property located at 191 Lemoore Drive, APN 051-161-100, to allow for pre-zoning of the property to RS3, single-family, low density.
Second.
Moved and seconded. For discussion, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if
Yes.
I may, just briefly, I believe I wanted to thank our acting city clerk because the putting in the tabs for the ordinances and the resolutions is extremely helpful.
No, it is. You're absolutely right. It's extremely helpful.
So thank you.
So the next item we need to vote on is, on this item, is a draft, it says draft resolution?
It's a resolution.
It's a resolution.
Resolution, okay, resolution. So is there a motion on that?
Do you want to go for it?
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution number 2013-
Number 46?
Number 46, a resolution of the City of San Carlos making a determination of property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part .05, implementation of Article 13A of the California Constitution, commencing with Section 95, Division 1 of the Revenue and Taxation Code for the property located at 191 Lemoore Drive, APN 051-161-100.
Second.
Point of order, or whatever, in the agenda, it's 12A, in this, it's 13A, which is it?
A.
At least X11 is 12 and
It's
X11
a
is...
typograph. It's
Which
type-
is, which is
it's
correct?
13.
13?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good, then you did it right, it's fine, we're good. Just wanted to make sure in case there was a technicality. Okay, moved and seconded, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. That's all that Latin I had. Okay, moving on. Item 9B, consideration of adopting ordinance 1462 to amend the zoning district boundary map to allow for pre-zoning and annexation, and consideration of adopting a resolution of the City of San Carlos making a determination of a property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part 05, implementation of Article 13A of the California Constitution, commencing with Sections 95, Division 1 of the Revenue Tax Code for the property located at 299 Club Drive, APN 049-012-070.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to need to recuse myself from
Okay.
this.
As you
since
did
it's-
last time?
Yes.
Okay. We'll wait for you to leave.
For those folks watching at home, Councilwoman Clapper excused herself because she lives within 500 feet.
Right, and
of
she did that
this
at the
annexation.
introduction of it, and she did it again this time. Correct. Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
All right, good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. I'm Associate Planner Jill Lewis, and I'm here to present the request for consideration of adopting Ordinance 1462 by second reading, and that would amend the zoning district boundary map to RS3, single-family low density, and consideration of adopting a resolution to authorize a property tax exchange. And both of these actions would be the final steps for the city to allow the pre-zoning and annexation of 299 Club Drive.
Questions for Ms. Lewis? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for the ordinance.
So I'll move approval of ordinance number 1462, ordinance of City of San Carlos City Council adopting a zoning district boundary map amendment for the property located at 299 Club Drive. The APN is 049-012-070 to allow for pre-zoning of the property to RS3, single-family low density.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes, and I realized I forgot to ask if there was anyone in the public wishing to speak, even though it's not a public hearing. But apparently there isn't, so I guess I got away with that one, as they say. Missed that one. The next one would be a resolution.
Mr. Mayor, I move adoption of resolution number 2013-47,
Number 47?
a resolution of the City of San Carlos making a determination of property tax exchange pursuant to provisions of Chapter 282, Section 59, Part .05, implementation of Article 13A of the California Constitution, commencing with Section 95, Division 1 of the Revenue and Taxation Code for the property located at 299 Club Drive, APN 049012070.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. And again, let the record reflect. Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Thank you very much.
What is an APN?
Assessor's parcel
number.
Assessor's parcel
Yeah.
number.
Let the record show that Ms. Clapper had to recuse herself because, again, she lives within 500 feet. All right, moving on. Item 10, new business. Item A, consideration of resolution implementing administrative changes to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology, San Mateo County, for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services. Mr. Mora.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian Mora, Assistant City Manager. The next three items are related in that they are the product of some negotiations between Rethink Waste, Recology, and a subcommittee of the board at Rethink Waste. The reason they're coming to you in May is in June, Recology submits its annual rate application, and one of the things that we're doing both at the city staff level and at SBWMA is reviewing all of the items related to the rate application before it shows up in June. And as I think we might have mentioned in the council newsletter, we've already found a significant issue in the 2012 rates, which will result, I believe, in a significant reduction in the 2014 rates after it's all crunched. The first of the three items, 10A, is a series of administrative changes to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology. As the council is probably aware, the franchise agreements in this county are held by each city rather than by the JPA, so they have to be acted on one by one. And essentially, there are two sets of amendments here. One are amendments in sections 602, 703, and 704 that relate to a staffing change where several positions at Recology were eliminated, some responsibilities were transferred to Rethink Waste, and the result is a savings of over $300,000. But to capture those savings, there's a need to revise the franchise, as it was very specific in terms of staffing at Recology. The balance of the changes in the proposal are so-called administrative changes, and as the case with any negotiation, some of them were desired by the agencies and Rethink, and some of them were desired by Recology. So I'd suggest that it could be reviewed as seen as a package, as it were. I have Kevin McCarthy from SBWMA and Gino Gasparini from Recology here to answer questions as well, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments the council may have on this item.
Item 10A, questions? I have one, at least. The $325,000, is that for the entire SBWMA or just for?
Correct.
Right, okay. Didn't think it was just ours.
No.
Hopeful, but didn't think so, okay. Also, the other question I had is, are all the other cities, all the other joint power, in the joint powers doing these same things?
That's correct, and my understanding is San Mateo and Foster City are doing it at the beginning as we are. We'll hear the other agencies in the next month or two.
But they're all the same?
Correct.
Okay, okay, thank you. Other questions? None? Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion then for 10A. We'll do this separately.
I move that we approve the resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, or approving.
Excuse me, I'm sorry,
Yes.
we need a number.
Number 48.
48, okay. Resolution number 2013-48. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving amendment number 1 to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology, San Mateo County for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services, implementing administrative changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. 10B is consideration of resolution adding section 8.08D to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology, San Mateo County for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services, authorizing city manager to make administrative changes.
Correct. And essentially, all I would add to that is this, adding this provision enables the city manager or their designee in the future to make changes such as the item you just saw administratively. Obviously, the city manager could always elect to bring them to the council, but once this amendment is adopted, assuming that it is, then the city manager and the council have that option. And unlike the first item, this is a agency by agency discretion. You can either adopt it or not. It does not affect the package.
Okay. Questions? Discussion? Otherwise, I entertain a motion.
I had a question.
Of course.
I was talking about if such modifications do not materially impact the cost or quality of services delivered by the contractor. Is that only materially impacting the costs going up? Is it okay if the costs go down, or is that?
I think the intent in the language is to suggest that the changes that the city manager or their designee would do administratively would be minor items. And the
Okay.
theory is that if it was something that would significantly affect costs, it would come back to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
For discussion, I have,
Sure.
for myself, I understand, that things can be rather mundane and seem pretty simple, but given the fact that we have currently, the way the board is set up with the SBWMA, there's no elected officials, it's staff only. So I would rather see this not pass, and when changes are made, small though they may be, that they do come before the council. Understanding that, as Mr. Morris said, I suppose it would be up to the city manager or his designee to bring them or not bring them. I would rather not give that choice.
The select committee did vote 9-0, I guess. I think it was unanimous, I believe, that was set up to have elected officials on the SBWMA. It hasn't happened yet.
Hasn't happened
No,
yet.
it hasn't
That's-
happened
that's
yet.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
going to come. It's going to come to us, though. I would assume in approximately a month or two.
Yeah, I think about that time frame. It goes back to the SBWMA board, and then
So
it
60
comes through
days, 60 to
the
90 days, it'll
various
come back to us.
agencies.
Okay, as long as everybody's aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel more comfortable. I think I would agree with you, except that I know this is coming back to us, and I would assume that most of that we're going to get a majority, because you have to need a majority of the joint powers to vote on this. I would think the way the tenor's going.
Two-thirds vote would be
Two-thirds, thank you.
required.
Two-thirds, especially with the 9 that was, if they can convince their councils, that would be 12, or 9 out of 12 is 75%. But anyway, so I would still be comfortable doing this, because I think what's coming up, just to have it administratively all 1, 2, 3, but that's up to the council to decide what to do.
Can I?
Sure.
Can I ask a question? How many elected officials will be on the board then?
We haven't seen the language. It's being drafted by the Redwood City City Attorney, as I understand it, but I would imagine that there would be one elected official per city. And the other discussion, as I understand it from the last meeting of the Blue Ribbon Committee, was there was a desire to establish a format not unlike CCAG, where there would be a technical advisory committee, perhaps involving some of the folks that are currently on the board, and that, at least in the beginning, the idea was to not include that in the JPA language, to keep the JPA amendment that comes forward simple. And it's also my understanding that the desire of the Blue Ribbon Committee is to have the changes effective with the September meeting, so that the elected officials could be the one to approve the 2014 rates.
So the board would go up by how many members?
No.
Well, the size would be the same.
The size would be
It's
the same, you'd just be
It
replacing
would be elected officials versus city managers and
Right.
department heads, because
Okay.
there's 12 agencies, there'll still be 12 board members.
All right, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
So if I hear what you're saying, and you think it's that certain, then.
Well, because there were 9,
Yeah.
and as I understood it, I wasn't able to go, but as I understood it, all 9 were on board with that. So again, in 2/3 is 8, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Again, there's no guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee.
I was going to leave this to the last item, but let me, I guess this is the last item, excuse me. Let me interject it here. I actually wouldn't mind if we had a council discussion about how we feel about having these subsidiary bodies have electeds on them versus staff on them, even before we get the specific proposal in. Because it's a fairly complex issue. I by no means have made up my mind on it, but I could see a situation where whichever way we feel is the right way to go, in general, and perhaps in this case, we might want to join in the lobbying effort to see that happen with our colleagues in other cities. That won't happen if we wait till the proposal comes in front of us. So I just offer that for consideration.
I guess I'm not following what you would want to lobby for.
Well, it would depend on what the council came down. Let's say hypothetically, for example, that after discussion, the council said, the council's sense was, in this particular case, we think it would be better off to have staff members on the oversight board, which is obviously contrary to what 9 of the representatives did. It would be, if we actually felt that way, it would be beneficial to have the time to try and go out and make, lobby people to try and get that point of view across to other agencies, because we are not in this alone. It's not a matter of just what we feel, because we can be, we get carried along with others if we happen to not disagree with them. And I'm not trying to prejudge what the council would say. That's, to me, the value of having the discussion before waiting for the proposal, rather than wait for the proposal.
I thought that was what the task force, the purpose of the task force was.
It was what the task force
Okay.
was tasked
Well,
to
but
do.
the task force is not the council. The task force is.
I understand.
The task force.
I understand. I disagree with your
delegate
premise
some
on
of
that
these-
one, but I think we should wait for when we get it, and, we'll have to.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
so
sure.
I have a question regarding this, because what I understood from Mr. Mora was the thing that we just voted on that saved,
$325,000.
325,000, not all that goes to San Carlos, but still 325,000. That's the kind of change that the city manager could, or his designee could negotiate. Now, that's all going to change when the board format changes, or actually not. No, now that I think about it, yeah. So those kind of changes could happen, and the board never even sees them, elected or staff members, whichever. My concern is, it always feels good, like tonight, to vote on something that saves ratepayers or taxpayers or whatever $325,000. But it could just as easily go the other direction, that it's $325,000 more. Therein lies my concern, that some what we call administrative change happens, and instead of saving us money, it's costing us more money.
Sure.
And so that's my
Mr. Maltby?
concern.
If I may respond to that.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with your assertion that $375,000 would rise to the level of a council action item. But what the $375,000 doesn't represent the action I would be taking as the city manager. That action would be less than $20,000 change for our city.
Right.
Collectively, it's that much. But that's a misrepresentation of the amount of control I would have. One of the interesting things about, this whole discussion about, the council and staff and whose role does what, is that the real ability to control service here is in the franchise agreement, which resides with each individual council, not the SBWMA board. The SBWMA board's role is really fairly limited in terms of what they can affect and what they can change. The real change would occur on the individual franchise agreements with cities. If this were a city department, I would be tasked with managing it directly, and only those higher level decisions would come before the city council. This just tries to honor that model of service, I think. I think that's where the board is coming from, and just recognizing that, you're paying for that service. Do you want your staff to do what your staff does on every other service and bring forward the higher level decisions to the city council? It's a quirk that we run into with these JPAs because of the idea that there are separate governance structure, regardless of whether it's staff or electeds on the board.
Great, okay. I think I'm convinced.
Well, I'll entertain a motion for 10B then, for the resolution.
Mr. Mayor, I'll recommend approval of resolution number 2013-
Number 49.
49, resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving amendment number 2 to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology San Mateo County for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services, authorizing the city manager to make administrative changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott? Sorry?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay, moving on, item 10C. Consideration of resolution amending attachment 1 of the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology San Mateo County for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services, incentives and disincentives.
Yes. Mayor and members of council, this is an interesting one. As you probably remember, when we had the former Allied Waste franchise, one of the problems that we had in terms of getting that particular vendor to perform is the agreement was so old, we didn't have incentives and disincentives at all in the document, and it was very difficult to move things forward. In the case of the Recology franchise, we have a number of incentives and disincentives. And what has happened in the last couple years is as Recology has gotten all their routes tweaked and moving forward, they now are earning a lot more incentive payments than the cities are getting in disincentive payments. And we're reaching the point where starting in next year's rates, if that's not changed, this will have a material effect on the rates going up further. And so what the subcommittee did in working with Rethink and with Recology is to come up with a negotiated agreement where essentially Recology is saved some bookkeeping time and reporting requirements, and in return, both sides don't receive the incentive and disincentive payments on what's called the missed initial pickup, which essentially is when a customer initially calls and says, my garbage is not picked up. Now, what's significant in this change is the other half of that payment, the so-called missed pickup collection event, which means after the resident calls, if they don't get the items picked up in 24 hours, there's still a fine. So I think from the point of view of staff and from the agencies, this negotiated change preserves the thing that's most important from those of us helping to manage the franchise, namely the missed pickup collection event, but it also reduces the cost to the agency for the missed pickup initial complaint. I guess the good news in all of that is because Recology is, making money in effect at this because their service continues to improve. It's a good thing, but it also suggests there's an opportunity to waive that. And as we note in the staff report to Mayor Grisilli's earlier question, this one does have a specific impact on San Carlos. It is projected that it would result in a savings of almost $15,000 in terms of impacting the 2014 rates, which again is the reason we're bringing it to you tonight. It's also worth mentioning that this particular item, 10C, is agency specific. If the City Council does not want to make this change, you have that ability, but you also then end up adding another 15 grand onto the following year's rates. So that's the reason we're recommending it to you at the staff level, is to save that 15 grand in the 2014 rate year.
Questions? Mr. Collins?
I think I have one. What happens if we approve this tonight, this resolution, and we find that these payments turned out to be a good thing, or these incentive-disincentive payments? Could we bring it back?
Well, I suppose like everything in life, it's subject to negotiation. We could always talk to Recology. I'm not sure what they might want in return for them coming back. But I think that each year they're earning more and more money. So the trend has been pretty clear. And again, as I've looked at it, my two observations are, number one, I think it's good that we can trade Recology some reduced paperwork in exchange for saving the ratepayers. And number two, I think it's key, we're keeping the collection event penalty. That isn't going away, and that's the one that, frankly, I'm a little more interested in keeping, because if they don't pick up the trash within 24 hours of either the ratepayer or myself or Nakai or somebody calling them, we still need that hammer. And so that's still in place. So I think it's, on balance, a pretty good compromise.
Sounds like there's not much downside to it.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay.
But again, this one is strictly the council's call. If you don't change it, both of these stay in, and then the additional 15 grand goes on to the next year, rate year.
Mr. Grocott.
Following up on Mr. Collins' question, I suppose that would be a matter of still keeping the data on complaints.
Oh, yes.
And
Oh,
we
yes.
will still do that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the
Oh, yeah.
complaints generally come into City Hall first and then get transferred over to Recology, or do we know?
Sometimes it's a little of both, Councilmember Grocott. Sometimes they go directly to Recology. Sometimes they come to us. If they do come to us, either to Nakai or I, we will call Recology and get them to address it. And again, that's the distinction between these two categories. You know, do they respond to the missed pickup once the resident and either the city staff or their call centers pointed it out, or after 24 hours, is it still a problem? And that was the part, frankly, that kind of put me over the line in terms of supporting this at the board was we still get to fine them, not to sound mean here, if they don't perform in 24 hours. And I think that's the most important part of this whole program. So we still have some tools. As it were.
And just to be sure, to clarify then, if the call comes into San Carlos City Hall, of course, we can track that. If it goes to Recology, they track it, and we get some kind of report from them. Or
That's right. They have a reporting system we can enter into. We have our own reporting system, and we do track it, you bet.
Good. So we could follow that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Other questions, comments? Not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of resolution number 2013-50.
50.
Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving amendment number 3 to the franchise agreement between the City of San Carlos and Recology San Mateo County for recyclable materials, organic materials, and solid waste collection services, performance incentives and disincentives.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. I'd like to thank Mr. McCarthy and his staff and Mr. Gasparini and his staff for cooperating and offering some of these things with staff, and we'll go on from there. But thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Before we leave this item, and the city attorney can shut me down if it's inappropriate, but it seems to be when we talked about rates the last time, one of the things that did come up is when people put out carts that are half full, and I'm thinking of ones especially that you can't do this necessarily with a garbage can, the black can, and you can't always do it with the yard waste if it has food scraps in it, but if it's just yard waste, like leaves and grass clippings, if it's half full and customers just keep that can back from the curb, or in other words, don't put it out, that kind of practice would save us, could potentially save us money in our agreement with SBWMA. Do we want to, I'm looking for a consensus thing here, just like we've made this change, do we want that kind of thing on the dais at some point and see if we want to somehow communicate with our customers on that type of issue and see if we can get some savings there as well?
I'm not sure, Mr. City Attorney, what...
It sounds like an agenda item request.
That's what I'm asking for.
I
Yeah,
understand
is it
that.
something
I
we
understand. We're not going to talk about it now. I guess we could talk about it, but I think it's somewhat moot, but because it's the contract, but...
Not yet.
Well, I think you're constrained by the Brown Act on this, obviously. You can, staff could answer a specific question about how that might work, but to
Well, why don't we
have it-
just have it agendized
Yeah.
and have staff give us a report, and it might be a short one or a long one,
Yeah,
depending.
I was just going to mention that on the council's tentatively your June 23rd meeting, we have 2 study sessions in this area. One is the discussion of whether or not to look at a discount program, and the other is to look at rates, and it is going to include the general discussion that Councilmember Grocott has raised, including some of the stuff that Recology is piloting in
Good.
San Francisco.
All right,
So.
that's good, thank you. All right, our last item is item 10D, consideration of authorizing the mayor to send San Carlos comment letter to Caltrain on the Caltrain/California High-Speed Rail Blended Operations Supplemental Analysis dated April 2013. Mr. Mora.
Yes, thank you. Council will probably recall that in 2011, when high-speed rail was rebooted, I think was the expression, 3 of the local elected officials, Anna Eshoo, Rich Gordon, and Joe Simidian, proposed looking at what they call the blended operations, which basically is seeing how many trains per hour one can put in the existing 2-track system, and also if you added passing tracks for a portion of the Caltrain Peninsula Corridor. When that study came back in late 2011, San Carlos was one of the 3 agencies to comment on it, in part because most of the passing track items or options that were discussed involved the length of San Carlos. And so we sent a comment letter after the council approved it in early 2012, and a number of our suggested comments were deferred until later, and they've still been deferred, which is one of the reasons, by the way, that as part of the draft letter that you see tonight, we're attaching some of the same comments as before. But some of the significant things that have happened since our comment letter and since this new study, which just came out a week ago or so, which is called the supplemental analysis, is that number one, all 5 of the passing track options were shown as viable, because one of the questions some of the cities had, including San Carlos, is do any of these not work? And the answer is no, they all work. Another thing that we learned, which probably not good news for San Carlos, but at least we have some more data, is that the options that are in the middle of the system, namely the 3 that involve all of San Carlos and all of Belmont, are the most efficient options, and therefore, barring other considerations, are probably the most likely to be selected if passing tracks occur. It seems to me that, as we did in the previous letter, it's important for San Carlos to point out that, like every other city, we're not excited about the notion of passing tracks, and that we think that before passing tracks are considered, that there's a lot of discussion in any future study in this area regarding why it might be necessary to have more than 8 trains per hour, because you can run up to 8 trains per hour without passing tracks, but once you go to 9 or 10 trains an hour, that's when they're required. So I think those are the key significant additions in the supplemental analysis. The report has been released. Caltrain has given the agencies until the end of this month to comment. Staff thought it important to bring this to you as soon as possible so you could have an initial look at the letter, make any changes you want, and also if you want to kick it around further, you could always continue it to your next meeting as well.
Questions for Mr. Moore or comments on the letter? Otherwise, if none, I'll entertain a motion to approve me signing this letter and sending it. 10D. Just approving the letter, right. We just need a motion to approve the letter.
Mr. Mayor, I will move that we approve the letter to be sent to the High-Speed Rail Authority,
Actually, it's to Caltrain with a copy to High-Speed Rail.
to Caltrain with a copy to High-Speed Rail.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper? Yes. Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. There are no other items on our agenda. We are going to go into closed session, so we're not technically going to adjourn at this time.
Well, actually, Mr. Mayor, this meeting is being adjourned and we're reconvening the special meeting that.
Once again, corrected by council. We're adjourning this meeting, and as was mentioned by Mr. Grocott, Nadia Holiber, I've known Nadia since I came into office in 2005. Just a great supporter of Millbrae, a great legislator, a great person, and she will be sorely missed by her city, certainly her family, her city, and the entire county. So in her honor, I'm adjourning this meeting of the San Carlos City Council. Moving into closed session.